Hello everybody and welcome to the Winecast. I'm finally getting around to casting in depth on some Italian wine regions as I prepare for a certification specializing in Italian wine, and my studies have taken me in this cast to the Val d'Aosta, or Valley of Aosta, a region in Italy with a unique and compelling wine culture that sadly isn't well known outside of its small corner of the wine world, but that bears a closer look. The Val d'Aosta is the smallest of Italy's 20 administrative regions that also double as wine regions and, fun fact, is the only one of Italy's regions that isn't further divided into smaller provinces. It's in the upper northwest corner of Italy and it's known by three separate, though obviously closely related names. The Val d'Aosta in a local language called Val d'Otan, the Valle d'Aosta in modern Italian, and the Valle d'Aoste in modern French. The multiple names for this region are a clue that this area has a foot in each side of the cultural, historical, and linguistic divide between France and Italy. And, in fact, its history and roots go back to well before the birth of either of those nation-states, with its most important historical connection being to the noble house and later Duchy of Savoy, for over 800 years starting in the 11th century. The counts and later dukes of Savoy ruled their domain as a largely independent state and pulled culturally from the lands and regions around them that would later become modern France and Italy. The House of Savoy didn't last, and the Aosta region would find itself joined to the emerging nation-state of modern Italy at its formation in 1861, but not without bringing with it deep ties to French culture, especially a strong linguistic connection that left the region trilingual to this day, with modern Italian and French both having official status in the region and a protected local language, Valdôtan, still spoken by more than half the population, and that's related to Provençal and the other Oc languages of southern France and to Catalan in Spain. So, though the Val d'Aosta is formally a part of modern Italy, it's also legitimate to think of it as connected to a larger cultural zone that straddles parts of Spain, France, and Switzerland as well. As a result of this connection, the region has enjoyed a special autonomous status in both politics and economics relative to most other Italian regions since the end of the Second World War. This is Italy's smallest region, not just geographically, but in terms of wine production as well, with most of its 475,000 gallons of wine or so produced per year consumed within the region, either by locals or tourists who come for the natural beauty and alpine skiing, and relatively little of the region's wine is exported. Though production is limited, the judgment of critics has tended to be that the wines produced in the Val d'Aosta are of high quality. Getting more specific about the Val d'Aosta's geography, the region as a whole is roughly rectangular in shape and is bordered on the north by Switzerland, on the west by France, and on both the east and south by the Piemonte or Piedmont region of Italy. The region's most famous geographical feature is Monte Bianco or Mont Blanc, on the border with France, and part of the chain of mountains called the Graian Alps that have a huge impact on the region's climate. Within this chain and very close to Mont Blanc is the source of the Dora Baltea River that flows through the larger region and that created the Valley of Aosta proper, for which the whole region is named. This valley that the river flows through can be broken down into three general areas, an upper, central, and lower valley, each with unique climatic and topographic features that contribute to local wine production. Generally speaking, the entire region is at high altitude, with some vineyards in the upper valley at elevations close to 4,000 feet above sea level, with elevation dropping as the valley moves south and eastward. The elevation is the result of the mountainous terrain, and these mountains, in particular the Alps, have a big influence on the local climate that's best described as a cool continental climate showing cold winters and a short but warm summer growing season. The climate is cooler and drier the closer you get to the Alps and the higher elevations of the upper valley, and as you move south and east, things get warmer and wetter. The Alps create a rain shadow that not only keeps the upper valley and the region as a whole dry, but that also keeps the growing season relatively sunny with about 2,200 hours of sunshine per year, about as many hours as you'd find in Rochester, New York in the United States, and a couple hundred more than in either Turin or Milan in neighboring Italian regions. Though about 80% of the plantings in the valley are red, white grapes are dominant in the upper valley. And speaking of grapes and plantings, unsurprisingly for a mountainous region, most of the vineyards in the area are planted on slopes, sometimes very steep slopes, that need terracing to make viticulture possible. Soils in these hillside vineyards tend to be composed of limestone or schist. What grapes are planted in these and the region's other vineyards? A combination of grapes that are indigenous or native to the region, along with other grapes that have become traditional there, even if they're not native, as well as other grapes that are planted and more widely used throughout Italy or throughout the wine world. Native and traditional reds include the indigenous grapes Petit Rouge, Fumon, and Pré Rouge, also known as Premetta, a somewhat obscure pair of local grapes, Vien de Nu and Néré, and the much better known Nebbiolo that's known in the Val d'Aosta as Picotendro. There are plenty of international reds represented in Aosta's vineyards, with Pinot Noir, Gamay, Merlot, Grenache, and Syrah being the most common examples, and Barbera, Fresa, and Dolcetto from the neighboring Piedmont also turn up. On the white front, Pré Blanc, also known as Blanc de Morgex, is the only native variety, but Moscato Bianco, Petit Arvin from Switzerland, and Pinot Grigio, known locally as Malvoisie, go back a long way in this region's white wine culture, while Müller-Thurgau, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, and Gewürztraminer are more recent arrivals. These grapes are all made into wine in a quality framework represented by only one DOC, the Valle d'Aosta DOC, that has 7 subzones with more specific regulations for viticulture and production. Along with only one other Italian wine region, Aosta's neighbor the Piedmont, this region has no IGT quality tier, so the 20% of the region's wine that doesn't qualify for DOC status is declassified to ordinary table wine status. There are also currently no DOCGs designated for the Valle d'Aosta. The 7 subzones of the Valle d'Aosta are all organized around the Dora Baltea River, each with vineyard areas either on both banks of the river or on the north, that is, the south-facing bank, to make the most of potential sun exposure. The subzones are almost all associated with the village of the same name along the river. Starting in the upper valley and moving south and east, they are Blanc de Morgex et la Salle, Enfer d'Arvier, Torretta, Nu, Chambave, Arnal-Montjovet, and Donas. Though as we saw, a wide variety of grapes are planted in the vineyards of various parts of the valley, there is a particular grape associated with each of these areas and with the subzones located in them. In the upper valley, it's the white grape Pré Blanc, or Blanc de Morgex. In the central valley, it's the red Petit Rouge, and in the lower valley, it's Nebbiolo. Let's have a closer look at each of these subzones. Planted almost exclusively on south-facing slopes between 2,600 and 3,900 feet in elevation, the Upper Valley's only subzone, Blanc de Morgex et de la Salle, produces dry white wines made only from the Blanc de Morgex grape that's also known as Pré Blanc. Thanks to the high altitude of these plantings, these vines aren't threatened by phylloxera because that parasite doesn't do well at altitude. So these vines are ungrafted and grow on their own roots. The cool climate in the Upper Valley helps produce wines that are crisp and high in acid, and that's a plus for sparkling wines. So it's no surprise that this subzone produces well-regarded traditional method sparklers based predominantly on Pré Blanc and supported by other whites. The Central Valley is not only home to the majority of the region's production, but also to the majority of its subzones. 3 of these zones, Enfer d'Arvier, Torretta, and Chambave, each produce a still red wine that's driven by Petit Rouge, while the 4th zone, Nu, uses Petit Rouge and other grapes to support the local grape Vien de Nu to make its reds. Both Nu and Chambave also make white wines, either a dry white based on either Malvoisie, that is Pinot Grigio, or on Moscato, respectively, or a sweet white Passito style based on the same grapes that have been partially dried and that may be labeled with either the Italian term Passito, which means something like raisined, or with the equivalent French term flétri, that means withered. Finally, the 2 subzones of the lower valley, Arnal-Montjovet and Donas, both produce reds based on Nebbiolo, with the former requiring a minimum 70% of that grape and the latter 85%. Of the 2, the wines from Donas are the more highly regarded in terms of quality, and these wines might even be the best thought of wines in the entire Valle d'Aosta. Quality production is taken seriously here, as reflected by the commitment to a high minimum percentage of Nebbiolo as the primary grape, and by this subzone's high standards for aging, the strictest in the region in fact, requiring 24 months minimum aging, 10 months of which must be on oak. This attention to quality has earned Donas high praise in the form of a playful nickname, Il Fratello Montano di Barolo, or the Mountain Brother of Barolo, that other very famous wine based on Nebbiolo. Since, despite the Valle d'Aosta's small size, it's home to a lot of grapes and a fair number of subzones to the main AOC, it might be worth finishing up this cast with a quick word about how wines from this region can be labeled and how to decode those labels. Basically, there are 3 designations that can appear on a Valle d'Aosta bottle. First, the wine can be labeled with the generic Val d'Aosta DOC, with the name appearing in either French or Italian and then followed by a stylistic designation, either red, white, or rosé, usually in Italian. Wines of this type can be made from any proportion or combination of grapes authorized for the whole region, that are grown in and that will follow production requirements authorized for the entire region. Second, a wine from the Valle d'Aosta can be labeled with the name of a specific subzone, like this one from Donnas, and that indicates that the wine is made in conformity with the production requirements for that zone and made from fruit authorized for and grown in that zone. And finally, a wine from Aosta can be labeled varietally and must be made from fruit grown within the region as a whole, and at a minimum 85% of what's in the bottle must be the variety indicated on the label. Thanks for joining me for another Winecast. I'll be the first to confess that I've yet to try a wine from the Val d'Aosta, but researching this cast definitely left me wanting to get my hands on some bottles and to sample its vino. I hope it has had the same effect on you, and if it did or was otherwise helpful to you, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope that in addition to any other comments you want to leave, you'll offer some suggestions for bottles or producers if you've had the good fortune to try these wines. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.